Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Michael Michel Andronov. I was born in Russia back in 1973. My father was a Communist Party functionary, a bureaucrat, a high ranking one at that. And so you could say that I kind of lived long enough to see what the Soviet Union was about from the inside. And also, my generation was the one who witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. So, the follow up in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were some very radical changes in policies of the Soviet Union in terms of domestic and international policies. But with the coming to power of Vladimir Putin in 2000 up until now, there is a lot of debate about how much back Russia has gone to the old Soviet Union realities in terms of international policies as well. So it's been a long time since I wanted to put together a documentary about what happened in 1968 when an El Al flight was hijacked, Flight 426, in July of 1968. It was done by the hijackers who belonged to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a terrorist group which was headed by George Habash. You'll hear more about him in the documentary. What's significant about that event or that incident is that nobody died, thankfully. Nobody was injured, but at the same time, it was a major shift in the pro Palestinian terrorist activity because it went global. There were no borders anymore, and the whole world was watching. There's a lot of things that happen in the background, and a lot of things that we tend to forget and tend to ignore these days because the Soviet Union is no longer there. But the big question is, are the ties broken? Have they dissipated? Or maybe not. So I just invite you to watch the movie and continue praying for Israel because Israel is fighting um, a lot of enemies on many, many fronts. And one of those fronts is terrorist activity domestically and internationally, backed by very powerful countries like Russia these days, Iran, Qatar, and other Arab League nations from all over the world who would love to see Israel, the tiny nation of Israel, gone. So, this movie is basically only scratching the surface in an entertaining way, I hope. Um, but what I'm going to do is leave in the comment, in the pinned comment in the comment section below, a link to an article that I put together, which will give you a much deeper insight in what was going on back in the 1960s. So, a lot is going on right now. A lot of things have been declassified, and I hope that we'll know and we'll learn more things in the future. Now that Russia's resources are being depleted in the war against Ukraine, Iran is being pounded back into oblivion by the allied forces of the United States and the IDF. And we're seeing a lot of things surfacing. There's a lot of support and pro-Palestinian sentiment across campuses and universities in the United States and Europe. And I just wonder how much brainwashing has been done to the Western civilization through the proxies and through the communists and through the Islamic forces, which work together against the tiny nation of Israel to wipe it off the map so that the West would never again have an outpost of democracy in the Middle East. And of course, spiritually speaking, we know what Psalm 2 talks about. It's when all the nations of the world get together against the people of God and against His anointed. And I'd like to thank everyone, every single one of you, who are praying for Israel, who are praying for churches in Israel, for Christians, for born-again people, and for those who are not yet born again, and for those who God predestined for eternal life. God bless you, and shalom.
Flight 426. Hijacking the narrative. The Cold War, terror, and the Soviet shadow. A plane disappears from the sky. Not in war. Not in accident. But by design. July 1968. A civilian airliner is seized and redirected into history. This is not just a hijacking. This is the beginning of something new. A battlefield without borders. 1 year earlier, the Middle East had been reshaped in 6 days. The shockwaves reached far beyond the region, into embassies, intelligence agencies, and the highest levels of global power. In Moscow, strategy was recalculated. At the center of it, Yuri Andropov, chairman of the KGB, master of what the Soviets called active measures. Not just espionage, not just intelligence, but influence, narrative, perception. A new language began to spread. Zionism, redefined as racism, as colonialism, as a global threat. Not only in Moscow, but across international institutions. But ideology alone was not enough. A new weapon was emerging. Not armies, not tanks, but attention. Global, immediate, unavoidable. Airplanes became targets, not for destruction, but for spectacle. At the center of this shift, a man with a different kind of vision. George Habash, a doctor, a nationalist, turned revolutionary. After 1967, his movement changed. Nationalism became revolution, and revolution became global. The organization he led, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, would redefine the battlefield. July 1968. El Al, Flight 426, hijacking. The plane is taken, redirected, controlled. No explosion, no crash. Something more powerful. A message. The world was watching, and it would never look away again. As the aircraft descended over North Africa, the destination was no longer Rome or Tel Aviv. It was Algiers, a city that would soon find itself at the center of an international crisis. Algerian authorities were caught off guard. There was no established protocol, no precedent for what had just arrived on their runway. A hijacked civilian aircraft carrying dozens of foreign nationals. Within hours, negotiations began. The three hijackers, members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, presented their demands: prisoner exchanges, political recognition, and time. In Israel, the message arrived quickly. Authorities in Tel Aviv were informed of the diversion. The government moved cautiously. This was no longer an aviation incident. It was a political confrontation. Within days, a first decision. The hijackers released the non-Israeli passengers. 32 individuals freed. Soon after, another step. Women and children were allowed to leave. The number of hostages narrowed. The message became clearer. This was no longer about everyone on board. The remaining hostages, primarily Israeli nationals and crew, were taken from the aircraft, held under guard in secure locations in Algiers, out of sight, but not out of the negotiation. The standoff stretched on. Days turned into weeks. Behind closed doors, negotiations intensified. And finally, an agreement, a prisoner exchange. After 39 days, the remaining hostages were released. The flight home was quiet. No headlines in that moment, no cameras on board, just survivors returning to Israel.
מטוס אל על שהיה בדרכו מרומא לתל אביב נחטף על ידי ערבים והובא לאלג'יר. נוסעי המטוס שאינם בעלי אזרחות ישראלית שוחררו ונשלחו לאירופה. 6 מהם הגיעו למחרת לישראל וסיפרו על קורותיהם.
Behind the scenes, another layer of the story was unfolding. The Palestine Liberation Organization, formed in 1964, was not created in Moscow, but it did not operate in isolation. Declassified intelligence would later state, the USSR has been the principal supplier of arms to the PLO. Training, equipment, political backing. In 1974, a turning point. A PLO office opens in Moscow. Archival materials suggest that contacts not only existed, they were systemic, between Soviet intelligence and militant actors. The Cold War was not only fought in Berlin or Vietnam. It was fought in airports, in headlines, in the minds of millions. A new kind of warfare had emerged. Stateless, global, psychological. And once it began, it never truly stopped.